Hey everyone, welcome to BactoChat, where we talk about the little things. I'm Cassidy.
And I'm Charlie.
And today we'll be talking about good studying habits. A bit about my background with studying. When I was in high school, if I'm being very honest, I wasn't challenged by many of the classes that I was taking, so I didn't study, at all. I wouldn't go home and study. Most of the time, if I was studying, I would cram right before an exam. I'd be like, okay, I need to know these equations. Okay, I'm good. Or I'd look over a couple terms or something, and then I'd just go right into the exam. So to be honest, I was not good at studying in high school. Mostly because there wasn't the need. But then when I came to college and I took courses like introductory chemistry, as easy as it sounds, it really is a weed out class in that way that it's very difficult for someone that might not have a really strong chemistry background or something of the sort. And you've got a lot of classes where there's a lot of work and there's a lot of concepts that you haven't heard of. The class is going very quickly, and so I had a lot of trouble figuring out how I wanted to study for these classes, especially as a microbiology student. That might make you study differently from someone else in STEM. So for example, you might study differently as an engineer versus a microbiology student. But for me, I spent a lot of time cramming and trying to study similarly to how I did in high school, but I'd get very stressed because I'd realize that this was not working for me, and then I'd get kind of not great grades, not what I was hoping to get. So I've done a lot of revamping since my first semester in college, but that's what we're here to talk about today. So, Charlie, how have your study habits changed from high school through undergraduate and then even into graduate school?
Yeah, so kind of similar to you, back in high school, I, thought I was very clever and didn't study very much. And then you get out of your little rural high school and discover that that is not necessarily the case. And that you really have to start putting in some effort to do well in classes. I think where things really changed for me was about the time I hit OChem.
Oh no.
OChem, you do need to study for that or things don't go fantastic. And I guess the two things that really made a difference for me is one, I started trying to study, at least a little bit every day. It may not seem like a lot, but if you can just say I'm going to put in 15 minutes every single day versus trying to cram it all 2 days before the test, which had been my previous strategy, it makes a huge difference. And honestly, a lot of times if you just, make a very modest goal, 10-15 minutes a day, you'll find that once you start, it's pretty easy to go half an hour or hour of studying. And when it comes time to take exams, it makes a huge difference. And also, I started using flashcards more, which I think to this day, they're still if I have something that I know is going to be a major struggle and it's just a lot of very intensive memorization, I think flashcards are really the most effective tool I found. I use an app called Anki, which uses spaced repetition flashcards. So basically you can decide if you can remember something easily, you can decide not to see that card again for a while. If you can't remember it very well, it'll show you to it more frequently. It's open source, it's free, I would highly recommend it. Just for anything like OChem or learning language where you need to just brute memorize a lot of things, I would still highly recommend that. So that's kind of how I got through undergrad. And then going into grad school, I think the biggest shift was in undergrad, there's usually a set answer to everything and kind of what they're going to ask you. In grad school, that's really not the case with your project. You're trying to discover something new, which is great, but it also means that there's not really going to be someone to guide you or tell you if you're doing things exactly right or not. So I would say the biggest shift in grad school is just you start reading a lot, all the papers you can find, all the books on the subject you can find, and that makes a huge difference. And even if something doesn't seem immediately relevant, a lot of times later on someone will ask you a question and it's really nice to be able to pull from that information. It makes you look like you know what you're doing even when you don't sometimes, which is a perk, and it just helps you keep from making a lot of mistakes when you're designing your protocols. You can learn from what other people have tried and found did or didn't work. So yeah, I guess that kind of sums up my transition for studying.
Yeah, I think that's great information. So, out of curiosity, I know you're from Wisconsin, but how large was your graduating class in high school?
50 people.
Yes!
Yeah,
I've
you
never
also.
found somebody else that had a high school that small, too. I'm about the
Yeah,
same.
very nice. Do you have any advice for people transitioning from a smaller high school to, a very large university like Penn State? Just like several orders of magnitude more students and just that much more competition. Because I know myself and a lot of my classmates from our rural high school really struggled with that transition.
That's a great question. You went to University of Wisconsin, so you could actually speak to this too. But yes, it's a very jarring experience for a lot of students from rural high schools, including myself. And generally, I found that a lot of people from my high school tried to avoid this as much as possible when they were looking for colleges, which is something I will discuss in another podcast on choosing a college that you want to go to. But I don't think that's something you should be scared of necessarily when you're coming from somewhere so small, because you can look at it as there's a bunch of opportunities that you could never be afforded coming from a rural high school and going to a school like Penn State, where there's thousands and thousands of students on campus with you. Yes, you will have to study hard, and there's definitely some difficult classes out there, but there's also great opportunities to get involved hands-on, and I think that's one of the best ways that I learned. So in microbiology, I've gotten to take a lot of lab courses, and they've really solidified some concepts in microbiology that I was having trouble with in class and in lecture and stuff. So if you can, and you're going to a large university, you'll have to seek them out kind of on your own, or you'll like see in an email somewhere that somebody's got this opportunity. But do not be afraid to go for it, because it's a huge learning experience, and it's way better to learn that way, in my opinion, than to sit down and have to stare at your computer or your notes for hours and hours.
Yeah, no, honestly, I would pretty much like everything you said. I think something you've discussed before is just that it's really important to become, involved with other students in your classes or get into lab early on. That really helps with the integration. Just the more of a community you can build, the faster that transition will be.
Yeah, going off of that, even if there's if you're not getting involved in outside opportunities like undergraduate research immediately out the gate, because it's very difficult to get into a lab when you're just a freshman and you don't have a whole lot of experience or like a whole lot of lab courses that you've taken that are very relevant to your potential research. One thing you can do to help get you involved and get studying to be more fun for you is you can get to know students in your class. I know I'm not a super outgoing person naturally, but I've started talking to people in my major through like clubs or research or just any other extracurricular things, and that's kind of how I got to start talking to more people, and knowing more people helps you get through classes because you have study buddies, and you also, if you miss a class, you have someone you can talk to about the material that you've missed. Another great way to learn is to teach somebody something, or you can teach one of your friends something, or
Right.
something of the sort to help you study. Even if you're not involved in organizations, you can just talk to the person sitting next to you in class. Like generally, if you're in college, you'll sit in approximately the same place. If you are outgoing, or even if you're not and you want to change something about yourself when you come to college, you can just turn to the person next to you and say, "Hey, I'm looking for someone to study with," to just spark a conversation. And then you've got somebody that you can talk to about anything that you're struggling with or anything that you want to study together. They might be helpful from the aspect of they might know more about something than you, like they might come from a different background than you, or they might be struggling themselves and you might know something about the class that you would want to teach them and practice like your understanding of the material, and that can even help them because they can hear it in a different light too.
Nice. So kind of going back more to the studying subject, do you go to office hours, or have you had any experience with those? Do you have any recommendations for other students based off of your experiences?
Yeah. So a lot of people I think see office hours as very scary because it's like it can be a one-on-one between you and a professor, but if you have questions, professors are very happy to talk to you about the material and they want to see you improve and understand it. That's why they're a professor. They want to teach people. This is a life hack. Some professors will even give extra credit points, or they will bump up your grade from like a B plus to an A or something if they see that you're actively trying to learn and you're actively getting involved with the material. That's a great opportunity too.
Great, yeah.
Yeah, I know you're a TA, or you have been in the past. So what are your thoughts about students coming to your office hours?
Yeah, so I would say that I really like when students come to office hours as a rule, but there's a couple things that I would say make a large difference in how effective it is for both a student and just and how well I'm able to help them. So first off, I would say if you want to come to office hours, you should at the very least have one or two questions, like very specific things in mind. Sometimes students will just kind of show up and say, I don't know how to do this. If it's like a very narrow problem set, I can maybe work with them, but usually before you can really help out a student, you need to know what part they don't understand. So if you can tell that they just haven't tried it at all, or that they don't have a specific question, that makes it a lot more difficult to really help them. And I think that the student gets a lot less out of it too than if they've already tried the problem set and have some ideas and just kind of need validation, or just have specific areas they need help in. So that's my number one tip there.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I feel like I've even had those times where I'm like, I just don't know where to start with this material. Like, I'm so unfamiliar with it. But you could go to office hours and try to talk through it with your professor. Or you could also start trying to do some self-diagnosis there and start looking up videos online about it. That's always helpful. And see what parts you can follow and what parts you can't follow, especially if it's like a math problem or something. If there's a point where you drop off and you're like, I have no idea what's going on anymore, that's a good thing to tell your professor, because you can pinpoint what parts you don't understand about something.
Yeah, and honestly, like, even if you don't even know where to begin, just at least try it. And when you go there, like, say, like, this is what I tried and it went nowhere. Because even if it's completely wrong, you're at least showing that, you're committed on this, you've put an effort. And that kind of sort of sets up a better footing for the professor or TA to, know that you're willing to put in the time if they're willing to put in the time. Versus if you just come in and say, I don't know what's going on, then there's not really any reason for them to invest their time necessarily.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely like that you brought up to try the problem and then take it to the professor, which is something that took me a really long time to figure out. If you're struggling with something, it's okay to be wrong. It's really okay. But you want to acknowledge that you're wrong and then go to someone that can help you. It's getting used to rejection and red marks and understanding that coming from high school and going to college, if you were a 4.0 kid in high school and then you come to a big university where you have to study and you're going to be wrong about things, it hurts.
Yeah,
It genuinely
yeah.
does. I understand that you're going to have to deal with those feelings, but there's really no point in your career where you're always going to be right. So you might as well start getting used to it.
Yeah.
But everyone's there to help you, so it's okay to show that not understanding something or that part of you that's just a little confused. That's okay.
Yeah, for sure. I guess another thing I'm curious about in your experience is, I don't know if you started out in microbiology as your major or not, but I think that the types of studying that people do kind of depends to some extent upon their major. As a microbiology major, how would you say you approach studying for your micro classes versus, your more gen ed based classes versus something else, or what do you say is pretty similar between subjects?
Oh, absolutely. That's a great question. And I'm going to ask you the same thing. But in my opinion, depending on what field you're in STEM, and then even if you're just like a micro major taking a gen ed or something, I actually started out BMB, so I'm not that far. So biochemistry and molecular biology, I'm not like that different than what I came in as. But for me as a biology student, you don't really get problem sets in classes. You might get them in chemistry and math, which are kind of more technical, very specific, like you work out problems using numbers. And you also have lab reports, which are kind of more consistently throughout your career, whereas problem sets for chem and math are at the very beginning of your career. So you might be used to problem sets and lab reports, and getting grades on those. But exams are going to be there the entire time you're in college. And for micro and bio students, exams are pretty much the bulk of what your grade is going to come from.
Right.
So studying for exams is very important if you're a biology major, because you're not always going to have a problem set that asks you, like, how do bacteria move or something, and then you write it down and then get it checked by a professor. Like, you really need to know what you don't understand and what you do understand when you're studying for an exam, because you generally don't have problem sets or something to check your understanding before you go into the exam. So ways that I study, do like to see the material at least like 3 times before I go into an exam. So looking over those lecture notes, highlighting parts that are very important, taking notes, like physically writing things down that are important, like what you think the professor was really hitting on in class that they were finding to be the most important things for you to know. Most professors will be pretty upfront about that. But writing things down helps me a lot, highlighting things helps me a lot, and just looking over it a bunch of times. So this comes back into play. Even studying for 15 minutes a day, every day, really helps, because you're starting to see things more often than just like one sitting and consuming it all at once. It's very difficult to do that and retain knowledge.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Do you have any thoughts on a similar question?
Yeah, no, I would agree with everything you said. I would definitely say I've varied a little bit depending on what class I have and how I study. Like, if it's a gen ed, like you said, just, reading everything over a couple times is super helpful. Honestly, if they're a really good lecture, use that to your advantage. Like, there's been classes where I've taken almost no notes, but I just make sure to pay absolute attention while they're lecturing. And sometimes that works out really well and you barely need to study it all. But, that kind of requires a professor that's very good at explaining things. So your mileage may vary on that. Yeah, honestly, the flashcards, like I said, I think if you have really intensive classes like OChem, where it's just going to be a ton of memorization, they're a good way to go, but they're definitely time consuming, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend them for something like your gen eds. And then for anything major specific, like, hopefully you like your major. So
Yeah.
honestly, I think it's to your advantage just to read as much as you possibly can about the subject. And even if it doesn't seem directly relevant to that test later on, if you continue in that area, it'll be really nice to have that very broad and deep knowledge base.
Yeah, that's true. You can definitely attest to that as a grad student. It's like, if you just memorize everything for exams and you want to go further in your career, and you're going to have to know that material that you were learning for the exam, it's obviously going to be relevant later. So you might as well learn it and not just like memorize and then forget it.
Yeah, 100%. And as you see that material over again and again, the things that are important, you'll start to really remember them well and pick them up. And the other stuff, if it's not important, you might never see it again, but you never really know for sure.
Yeah, for sure. If you're just a general STEM major listening to this too, and you're hearing all this bio talk where you just get stuck memorizing things for exams, don't be super intimidated by that, because not all fields are like that. So, for example, I actually had to talk to a couple engineers and tech majors about this, but I gathered some research. And
very nice.
Yeah. And a lot of students in engineering get problem sets like hammered at them constantly for their entire 4 years in every single class. So if you like math and if you like problem sets, and you like getting feedback on problems and stuff like that, then engineering's a good option. Of course, if you like the field, that makes a lot of sense, but do acknowledge that you're going to get graded on different types of things and different types of STEM fields. So problem sets in engineering will help prepare you for exams. Some professors are better at making their problem sets similar to their exams. Some of them might throw you off the deep end, and you have to go trying to apply what you've learned from those problem sets, but that's kind of engineering's thing. They do have exams, but they're different from like biology exams. In engineering, solving math problems or solving problems, and then in biology, it's like you've memorized these things. Now try to apply them to this concept, or sometimes it's literal just like fact recall, because you have to know these things to apply them later in research. Also, alternatively, there's tech majors, which could be like computer science or coding or something more in that realm, where you're submitting literal lines of codes to be graded, because that's what you're going to be doing, is you're going to be creating code, and making sure that that works is very important. You will also have exams and stuff like that, but if you're a tech major and your major involves a lot of coding, obviously you're going to be writing a lot of code.
Yeah, 100%. I would definitely agree with and like to emphasize what you said about, like chemistry and math and physics and engineering, where, a lot of the stuff you have to do in class is problem sets. And it took me a while to realize that, not only is it beneficial for in the class, but also, like you said, a lot of times the exams are very similar. And so that really gives you a leg up on trying to get a good grade on the exams.
Just to preface this, not every studying method, like our studying methods, might not work for you. You are going to have to spend some time sitting down and looking through some different ways to remember things. But in general, I will say, if you're a biology student, and I guess any student technically, the more you do something, the more familiar you're going to be with it, and the more comfortable you're going to be when you get to an exam and there's a question about whatever you were learning. So just get as much time hands-on as possible, whether that's studying for 15 minutes a day or studying in blocks like of an hour or 2 hours for your classes. Just don't cram. You can't get a lot of repetition by cramming, but repetition is super important no matter how you're studying.
Yeah. And I guess one more thing I'm going to throw out there is I feel like a lot of the methods we've been going over have been like very visual learner oriented. And I think that works best for me, but I know some people that's just an absolute no-go. They really don't pick up stuff well visually. And I would say one thing I've learned from those people that I've also used sometimes is if you record lectures, usually professors are really good about letting you record lectures if you ask them. I think some people like bring the little audio recorder with them and just set it up on the chalkboard at the start of class and record the entire thing. And then they will go back and listen later on. One, if you're an audio learner, that can be super helpful. It's a way to, have a chance to learn through that method. Also, even if you are a visual learner, it's another way to get the information in, which can help reinforce it. And finally, if you find that the professor is going extremely fast during class, this can be a really helpful way to slow that down by letting you go back later and write down everything they were saying instead of having to jot down everything as quick as possible during the class, which honestly can be detrimental too, in the sense that you're focusing more on your writing than actually paying attention to what's going on.
Yeah, for sure. Going off of that, I think you make a great point with the audio and visual learners. I've heard that if you combine those two, like you were saying, you learn way better. Like, as long as you have more ways to recall something, your brain can literally pull information faster. So, for example, listening and looking at lectures at the same time, not just looking at lecture slides or just listening, you can make those visual and audio connections between the material, which helps you learn doubly better. So
Yeah.
definitely record lectures or go back in the age of COVID. Everything's recorded pretty much. Go back through the lectures and then try to make those audio and visual connections.
Yeah, 100%. I guess I would like kind of the three classifications of like learning that I usually consider. I don't know if these are, official or anything, but like there's the visual aspect where you're actually watching them, then there's that like writing aspect where you're writing down those ideas, and then there's also the audio aspect. And the more of those three you can incorporate into trying to learn an idea, the better it'll stick.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's just in formal education where you're sitting and watching a lecture. There's also even this is kind of outside of those lecture themes, but if you're in a lab, you're actually physically applying things that you've learned from a lecture, looking at them hands-on, and then deducing things from things that you see or data or something like that. So that's also very helpful, is hands-on experience in any way.
Yeah, definitely. Are there any other last tips you would have for people in terms of studying, or anything else you think we overlooked?
Just in general, repetition's good. Hands-on learning is good. You're going to have to find your own pathway in studying, which is tough. I know I can't tell you exactly how to study. Get used to rejection. That's okay to be wrong. Just try to solve that problem before you get into exams, and then you'll be a lot better off that way. You learn a lot more from being wrong and then getting a correction. And getting to know other people in general. That's just a pretty brief overview of everything. But yeah, I think those are all really important things when it comes to studying.
Great. Sounds good. Well, thank you for doing this. Hopefully it helps others out. And hopefully they have a shorter learning curve. But thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening. If you're interested in more content, you can follow us on Twitter at Kovac_lab and check out our other videos on our YouTube channel, The Kovac Lab. See you next time on BactoChat.